Right then, folks, welcome back to the channel. My goodness me, it's been been a hectic couple of weeks, so haven't really had much time to do much in the way of streaming, but I am getting myself prepared, I guess, behind the scenes, what with channel stuff and whatnot for the new Formula One season, which is due to begin in what? Well, testing is less than a month away. I mean, my goodness me. So, right. So I thought I'd do a stream just to update because we've had a little bit of news over the week. And this relates specifically to Michael Massey. Michael Massey, for those who perhaps everyone, I think, in Formula One will probably know his name now, but Michael Massey is the race director for Formula One, the race director that made the very controversial decisions at the end of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which essentially, with a lap to go, took the title away from Lewis Hamilton and gave it to Max Verstappen. So the reports are coming in from multiple agencies now that Michael Massey is due to be sacked. Now, the reason why this has come about, or the reason why we now believe that to be the case, is because the Peter Byrne, who is the new chief executive or the new head of the FIA's F1 division, who is also leading the review, which is due out imminently. We'll come to that shortly. Has actually said himself. He says, "quote There is a possibility that there could be a new race director." So that is the head of F1 who is currently overseeing the review that into what happened at Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, has said publicly that there could be a new race director. So that is the biggest indication yet that Massey is going to be replaced. Now, it's not going to be like a football sacking. It's not as though we're going to have highlights of Massey sacked and all that sort of stuff. It will be a Massey's moved on to a different organization. Massey is an excellent this, that, and the other, and so on. In fact, Peter Byrne said that himself. He said, quote, Michael Massey did a super job in many ways. We told him that. So they've said so, but also there's a possibility there could be a new race director. Those were the words he used. In other words, it's he's done a really good job, but we think it might be a time to change. And I've said this a couple of weeks ago in my last stream. I said this will probably happen. And the reason why it probably happened is not because of Mercedes as such. So yes, Mercedes have obviously voiced their frustration in what has happened with what happened in Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and so on and so forth. But as I reported a couple of weeks ago, it's not just Michael Massey. It's not just Mercedes that have the issue with Michael Massey. It's not just Mercedes. There are other teams that have expressed a frustration, not just after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, but throughout the season as well. Most of them reporting that he's inconsistent with his decisions, and he's not decisive enough. He's not firm enough. He's not, he's too busy trying to tiptoe around, and it become apparent that he doesn't have the authority. He just doesn't get the authority. He lacks the authority. And so as a result, as I said, as I reported previously, and I've said since the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, I've said it here on this channel that I believe Michael Massey's future is untenable and I can't see how he can stay. And there we go. From the horse's mouth, Peter Byrne, there's a possibility there could be a new race director. That wasn't the only thing Peter Byrne did talk about. He did briefly in a very short interview, said that they would obviously with in terms of the Formula One review. Let's have a look. He's actually, if I bring up the quote. So he also said about the fact that the race director role could well be different. Now, Michael Massey as race director wasn't just race director, or shall I say the race director role included many aspects. It wasn't just turning up and refereeing the race. They were also tasked with so there was also sports director and safety and track delegate. So Michael Massey wouldn't just turn up to the races; he would travel to the circuits prior to the racing, make sure everything was meeting the standards. When they've done any work, for example, obviously we saw Saudi Arabia and Qatar host their first races this year. in order for that track to be approved and for that to all be ready and so on. Michael Massey's out there beforehand. He's checking all the safety delegations and so on and so forth. So it's not just a case of turning up and refereeing the race. And so what they are looking at is how into the new season, how whoever the race director is going to be, they're going to be looking at how they can delegate some of that responsibilities away from the race director role itself, so that whoever becomes race director, we can't. I mean, we're not going to guarantee Michael Massey's gone, but it certainly looks like that's going to be the case. Whoever's race director is going to come the new season won't have the same level of responsibilities, and so hopefully the idea is that they'll be able to focus more on the racing side itself, more between Friday and Sunday, between that first practice session and a checker flag on Sunday afternoon. That is what they want, and I agree that that's what they should be doing. You wouldn't get a football referee traveling around to the ground several days before a match to check that the pitch is all okay and so on and so forth. It's very simple in that by taking some of those responsibilities away, the idea is it will free up more time and become a less stressful role. Which I mean, one thing I would say for Michael Massey, whilst he made a major error at the end of Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, he has been overworked, he has been stressed. And I get the fact that he hasn't, in a couple of years, there's a lot of races in the season now. It's a lot of traveling. You get jet lagged and so on. And I can understand why he would be prone to making mistakes. The problem is that this was too big a mistake to make. There's no excuse. But it looks as though he may be on his way. Now, the other thing that Peter Byrne also talked about, and whilst we're waiting for this review from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which is imminent, absolutely imminent. So they said they wanted it out, but so I think they've got a council meeting, an FIA council meeting on the 3rd of February. That I believe is next Thursday. Top of my head, next Thursday. So it's due out in the coming few days. Whether it will be released to us, the public, then or not, I don't know. I will do the minute we have it. I'll be doing a live stream to go through what they're saying and try and pick out piece by piece what they're saying. But he's given us a glimpse, Peter Byrne. He's basically said about he said in terms of whether Verstappen would have stayed champion had an appeal been made. And he said that the most likely outcome, if Mercedes had lodged that appeal back in December after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, he said the result of that appeal would have likely seen the race null and void. So if that was the case, it would have just gone back to what the standings were before the start of the race, and Verstappen would have stayed champion on that basis. And I think the reason why they would have gone for such an action is because I don't think they could possibly strip Verstappen off the championship, because one, it's not his fault. He's got a lot of faults, I think, Verstappen. But what he done on that day, just because he was given an opportunity, he took it. The question isn't whether what do you expect Verstappen to do? Sit there and say, "Oh, that's bad for Michael Massey." Well, I can't possibly overtake Hamilton under these circumstances. That's never going to happen, So I would expect any other person in Verstappen's situation to make the most of the situation, and he certainly did. I don't agree with the way in which Verstappen has handled since then, calling Mercedes and Hamilton bad losers, etc. I think if it was the other way around, we would see Christian Horner throwing nuclear bombs out of Red Bull's bloody racing garage. It just wouldn't. If the shoe was on the other foot, it would be. I can't imagine what Red Bull would have done, and Horner and Verstappen. But so I don't like the reaction and the way in which he's gone, and certainly based on what this report is going to say, by the indications we've been given so far, it certainly appears as though Verstappen is going to have to contemplate the fact that if they deemed that the rules were broken by Michael Massey, that Michael Massey didn't follow the rules, that in itself would be saying that the outcome of the race was unfairly altered. And if that's the case, we know with a lap to go that Hamilton was going to be world champion. We know Hamilton was going to win the race. And if that by saying that was altered, that essentially makes Verstappen not an illegitimate world champion, because as a driver, he's there. He's in second place. He's been given an opportunity to have a little run at Hamilton. Hi, Lucas. Hope you're doing all right. It's more on the basis on that because of the fact. Look, let's get one thing absolutely clear. Without Michael Massey's intervention in Abu Dhabi, Lewis Hamilton wins the world championship. He wins the race, he wins the world championship. That's no doubt. I mean, don't just take my word for it. Christian Horner said there on live on Sky Sports F1 and said, with a few laps to go, just before the safety cars pulled out, said, we need a miracle. So Michael Massey's actions altered the outcome of the race. And that's, whilst this review that's going to be released in the coming days won't say that in as many words. It won't sit there and say Michael Massey ruined the race and therefore Lewis Hamilton would have won. It will say that Michael Massey didn't follow the procedure set out and he didn't follow the rules of the safety car. That, I believe, is what it's going to say. That is what Peter Beyer, the F1 team, the F1 boss, has publicly said. He has said that if there was if the review went to an appeal, the appeal would have led to a null and void race. That is essentially admitting that Massey would have that Mercedes would have won the appeal, but the outcome of the championship wouldn't have changed. But like I said, we'll do, the minute that review comes out, we will do a live stream and I will try and break down bit by bit exactly what it says and what they're saying. There'll also be a list of recommendations for the coming season. I think there'll be a few interesting things on there, but one thing we know will be on there without a doubt is there will almost certainly be a ban on team principals contacting the race director directly during the race, and rightly so. It's a bit like badgering the referee in football. Can you imagine? When all the players and what's around the ref, that we don't want to see that. And the same in F1, we don't want to see loads of team bosses. Don't forget, you've got 20 teams, 20 team bosses yapping away in Michael Massey's ear saying, what about this? What about that? That's not fair. That's not fair, and so on. Now, the bits that has been referred to in particular as to what happened in Abu Dhabi, which is why it's unfair, or what Michael Massey did. Now, while some will say, but all, any doesn't mean all, the problem Michael Massey had is this with what he did. He essentially neglected the other 18 drivers and the other 8 teams. There were 20 drivers and 10 teams. Hamilton and Verstappen are 2 drivers from 2 different teams. There's still 8 other teams out there that were negatively or positively, depending on which way you look at it, affected by Michael Massey's decisions not to follow the rules. For example, we talk about the few safety cars between Hamilton and Verstappen that were let through, but not the other safety cars. Sorry, not the other lapped cars. There was a lapped car between Sainz, who was in 3rd place, and Verstappen, who was in 2nd. So what Massey has essentially done is said, I'm going to clear the way for Verstappen to have a clear run at Hamilton, but he didn't allow Sainz, who is legitimately in 3rd place, to have an equal run at Verstappen in 2nd. So it's not just about the Verstappen versus Hamilton, but about the Sainz versus Verstappen and vice versa. And every row you go back where there were lapped cars, he has prevented them having a clear run at their opponent. And so you see what I mean? So if you null and void the entire race, it wouldn't just be the Hamilton-Verstappen scenario that would have changed. It would be the entire race and all the points and whatnot associated with it. There'll be teams that have finished 5th in the constructors that would have finished 6th instead, and so on and so forth. It would have become a logistical mess. All because Michael Massey did not follow the protocol. And it's a protocol in which he's already set the precedence, because he sat there over a year ago and said, I have to let all lapped cars through. It's a precedent that he set. It wasn't someone before him and he's come in and said, well, I'm going to do it my way and so on. It's a precedent that he himself has set. And that, unfortunately, is exactly why Peter Beyer has publicly said the decision, if it went to the appeal, would have likely have been null and void in the race. Mercedes had appealed the decision, they would have null and voided the race. In other words, they would have accepted the version of events from Mercedes that Michael Massey didn't follow the rules correctly. Now, the reason why null and voiding the race would have been the action, presumably, would be because the controversy of just finishing the lap earlier. They said, you know what, didn't they finish on lap 58, finished on lap 57, for example. All right, okay. That means Hamilton was leading at 57. That means change of title, etc., etc. It will cause more problems than it creates, or more problems than it solves. So, as I said, Peter Byrne, he's come out, he said, good chance that Michael Massey is going to go, and he's also said that if Mercedes had appealed, it probably would have null and voided the race. So those are two facts that we know. We have to wait now for the decision, or for the report due out this week. The report is due out this week, and whether or not it'll be made public this week, I don't know. They said they wanted it done by the 3rd of February, which is the next council meeting. That's next Thursday. They said that's at the latest. It could come out before then. They said they wanted it at the latest. Now, in terms of Lewis Hamilton, where is Lewis Hamilton? Or what should I say, where is Sir Lewis Hamilton? No one's seen or heard from him for quite some time. Is he coming back into Formula One? Is he going to race again this season? And I think that is yet to be decided by all accounts. Certainly from what Toto Wolff is saying, it looks as though he said he's in daily contact. I think from the sources are saying that it's going to be dependent on this review. They want to see what's in the review. And I guess, one of the things that I think has been mentioned as well is they've certainly said, so with Lewis Hamilton, they've certainly suggested that they would find it very difficult to race if Michael Massey stayed in charge. So for that reason, it's basically the FIA have been put in a very tricky position. Who do you keep, Lewis Hamilton or Michael Massey? That is the position that's been put upon them. Lewis Hamilton or Michael Massey. Michael Massey, at this moment in time, has no authority whatsoever. His authority is shot to pieces. Other drivers, we've all heard a lot of the radio messages since then. Other drivers, other teams, a little bit shocked by what Michael Massey did. And what he said, that's racing, Toto. No, it's not racing. It's not racing to artificially end a race to your liking. That is not racing, Michael Massey, you idiot. So his authority shot a bit, so his position is untenable anyway. But certainly the FIA, they're choosing, who are you going to choose? Massey, who's been in the sport in F1 for a couple of years, made some very catastrophic errors, and really hurt the image of Formula One at its most prime time. Bear in mind that Abu Dhabi Grand Prix was watched by many, many more people than would have otherwise normally watched the race. Or Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, one of the biggest global stars in Formula One, quite possibly in its entirety, and who was on the verge of winning a record 8th world title, which is a sort of a generational thing, a sort of thing that wouldn't be repeated in a generation. Hamilton is obviously the person they're going to choose over Michael Massey, and rightly so, because Hamilton is where the sport is, and I don't. And look, I personally, I'm not a big Hamilton man in terms of he's as a person. Do I think Hamilton's a good bloke? No, not really. I think he's a twat. But do I think he's an excellent F1 driver? Yes. How could you not? He's 7-time world champion. Should have been 8. So just because I don't like him as a person doesn't mean I can't respect him as a sportsman, as a Formula One driver, and as a Formula One fan. I want to see the best drivers in the sports, and I would rather see a race director with more competence come in rather than a driver who's a thrilling F1 racer and a competitor leave because of a dodgy referee, essentially. So the question is, when is Hamilton going to confirm? When will we hear from Hamilton again? I think we'll hear from him shortly after. I think we'll hear from him shortly after the F1 review. Again, that's due out in the coming days. It's the third, so the third is a Thursday. The third is indeed a Thursday. So we should see the review by Thursday at the latest, assuming they make it public, and I think they will make it public. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not all of it might be made public. There might be things that they keep, but I think they'll try and keep it as public as possible. And the reason why, and it's not like old Bojo with his police reports and whatnot. The reason why they want to make it public is because of the image currently around F1. Because of that single incident at the end of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the image to F1 worldwide has taken a really bad hit. There were many people who were watching Formula One either for the first time, or if it wasn't the first time, a lot of people were watching it because it was a big race and it's not something they would often watch. And so as a result, the eyes of many more people were watching this race than would have otherwise watched a Formula One race. And it was a good opportunity for Formula One to showcase. If they had handled it well and they showcased it well, what would have been the outcome? What would have happened? You would probably go into the new season, and you'll probably find there's potentially a new band of support starting to come in because of what would have happened at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and because of the opportunity of showcasing itself. So it was a really bad time to make such bad mistakes. Right, so going forward, we've got testing's coming up. Testing. What date is the testing? I have got it here. Testing starts in Barcelona on the 23rd of February. It will be the first chance to see the new cars. Obviously, the new rules this year. New rules. Yeah, but it's the first chance to see the new cars. I will be doing a live stream. Possibly, I'll probably do a live stream just before, and I'll do a live stream at the end of the day, of the day's racing, and we'll go through. And it's the thing is with pre-season testing, it's very difficult to gauge exactly who is where. Very difficult to gauge with what, and the reason why is because in testing, teams are running on different fuel loads, different tires, different engine modes, and so on. It's so all over the place. We just don't know who's where. What we will be able to gauge, though, is if we look but particularly Barcelona, if we look at last season's lap times and when I say last season's lap times, I mean in qualifying in Barcelona last year. And you look at those lap times, and then you look at the fastest lap times in Bahrain, and would get a rough idea of how quick these cars are. Now we expect them to be a little bit slower. Last year, the cars, Formula One cars, were about as quick as they're ever going to get last year. This year, it looks like they may be they may be a little bit slower to start with. They think they'll speed up, but because of the whole new aerodynamics, they'll have the same engines, but the aerodynamics won't be as advanced, should we say. So we'll have to see how they can. But anyway, that'll be a gauge of how we can test the competitiveness of each car. We'll be able to look at their individual lap time. So, for example, let's for argument's sake say McLaren set in qualifying last year in Spain that they got 1 minute 12, for example, in Barcelona, but this year they're getting 1 minute 13. Well, we can compare that to, say, a Mercedes who might have got, say, 110 and are getting 111.3 or 111.4. And that there could be a larger gap between their times and their times last year and their times this year, as opposed to, say, McLaren or Williams or whatever. So there's a way in which we can test to see who is looking good after the first set preseason. There's a couple of week gap after Barcelona to Bahrain, the 10th and the 12th, 10th to 12th, sorry, in Bahrain, warmer weather. So Barcelona will obviously, as typical with Barcelona, it will be the first testing will be a bit on the chilly side. Okay, it's not going to be Arctic conditions, probably. But 23rd to 23rd to 25th, yeah, it will be. It'll be nip in the air. It'll be a little bit chilly. It won't be typical Formula One conditions. So again, you expect the cars to be a little bit slower because it won't be in the typically warmer climate that they normally race in. Bahrain will give us a much better indication of where each car is, and the reason why is because it will be warm there in March. It's in the desert. It's going to be warm. Bahrain, 10th to 12th, and then of course the first race of the season is also in Bahrain. Again, like Barcelona, in Bahrain, we'll be able to do. I'll do some live streams before and after the sessions, and we'll be able to gauge how the performance is based on last season's qualifying. And the reason why we use qualifying as the gauge in which to work or which to use the data from is because the qualifying is when the car is at its fastest for obvious reasons. You see a single lap, very fast, lap time. That's how you get your laps. You go out, you do one super quick lap with minimal amount of fuel, and so on. And so we'll get a rough idea of who's doing what, and we'll be able to compare that to Barcelona as well, and look at the gap, not just the times, but the difference, and not the difference between one lap, but I mean, in comparison, comparatively to last season's race. So, for example, Williams, let's say Bahrain, they set a 122 last year, and they set a 124 this year. In testing, that would mean they were 2 seconds slower, but it could than their own qualifying last year. But this year, they could be. Let's say Williams are that, but it could be that Williams are say 3 seconds slower or 2 seconds slower, but McLaren are only 1.5 seconds slower than what they were last year. So we'll be able to determine based on that who is doing what in practice. So those are the dates to keep out for: February 23rd to February 25th in Barcelona, and then Bahrain 10th to the 12th. And then the first race of the season is the 18th. Practice will start on the 18th in Bahrain. So they'll be going back to Bahrain 2 weeks after testing. And then a week later, Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia was a really good race last year. Really enjoyed it. That is, of course, where the controversial Verstappen brake checking, if you want to call it that, there was Hamilton. So, and then Australia to start off in a little bit later this year. It'll be in April, but it's 23 races next year, and I'm looking forward to the most. We'll just go through because we haven't got much time left, but I'll quickly go through what races I am looking forward to next year. I'm looking forward to Saudi Arabia because that'll be, as always, that last season that was a good race. Miami in when is Miami? It's in the summer months actually. Miami. Let's have a look. The 6th of May. 6th of May is Miami, and of course Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan, in my opinion, has become one of the best tracks just because there's so much going on it. Great race, Azerbaijan. Probably one of the best ones out there at the moment. Okay, so just to recap very quickly, Michael Massey, it appears, has outlived his time on F1. If we're going on what Peter Byrne, head of Formula One, has publicly come out and said, his public words were, and I'll just quote again, Michael Massey did a super job in many ways. We told him that, but also there's a possibility there could be a new race director. So that is the biggest indication yet that Michael Massey is facing the sack as a Formula One race director. I don't think he will leave Formula One or the FIA at least altogether. He'll probably go into another area within the FIA, maybe into corporate or head office or something like that. But I don't think he'll be there now as Formula One race director come the start of the season. Right, that's all for me. It is a little bit of a shorter one this time around than perhaps normal, but I will be back. I'll be back as soon, and I'm not going to put a date on it because we don't know when, but as soon as this new report is released, I will be back, and I'll be back to go through exactly what has been going on, what the review says. I'll do a breakdown of it and so on, and we can take it from there. And then I will be back before the before testing in Barcelona. I will do a pre sort of testing stream, and I'll be doing a live stream at the end of every session to go through the timings and so on, and see what we can learn from the testing. I know, like I said, it's hard to gauge exactly, but we'll get a rough idea hopefully. So anyway, hope you all have enjoyed. Take care, and I'll see you all again soon.